All right, guys, we're doing more fantasy baseball rankings, and we're moving on to the outfield. The outfield is a really fun position to evaluate because on the top, you have some of the best players in baseball. And as you keep going down the list, you still have really good players, potential all-stars, potential breakouts, underrated veterans, big bounce backs, young players looking to break through. It's a really fun group. It's really deep, and we have a lot of names to get through. But before we get going, again, I just want to thank you guys for your support so far. The goal after the last video, the top 50 pitchers of fantasy baseball, which the link for that's in the description, was to reach 1,000 subscribers. And thank you guys. We did it. 1,000 subscribers. Honestly, can't believe it. There's so much fun to do so far, so much fun interacting with all of you guys, and I'm really excited to make more content. So if you guys like what you're watching, I know a lot of you guys watching are not subscribed, please click that big red button down there. Next goal for the end of the week, 1,500 subscribers. Why stop now? Let's keep going. So click that big red button, subscribe, throw the video a like, and get ready for more fantasy baseball content. All right, now let's get into it. First up, tier 1, two of the best players in baseball, two of the best hitters in baseball. It's Aaron Judge and Juan Soto, two former teammates, and when they were on the team together, it might have been the best offensive duo in a single season in the history of baseball. Judge himself is on historically one of the most ridiculous offensive runs ever in the game, ever, all time. Over his last 3 seasons, which is 421 games, he has over an 1,100 OPS over the entire span. The only other players in the history of baseball to ever have at least an 1,100 OPS over a 420 game stretch are Mark McGwire, Sammy Sosa, Barry Bonds, and Babe Ruth. So besides Aaron Judge, it's 3 guys that took steroids, allegedly, and 1 guy who played before the game was integrated. There's actually an argument that what Aaron Judge has done over the last 3 years is one of the most impressive runs ever in the history of the game. And then we have Juan Soto. Truthfully, it's hard to put these guys in the same tier in most leagues, but if you guys are playing on ESPN points leagues or any standard points league, Juan Soto does climb up to Judge. And the big reason is that he's going to strike out a lot fewer times than Aaron Judge this year. He's probably going to have a comparable batting average. He's definitely going to hit fewer home runs, but that big strikeout gap, probably 60, 70, 80 strikeouts, really will wind up aligning these guys, especially in points leagues where you get deducted for strikeouts. On top of that, the Mets lineup is better than the Yankees right now, and Soto's going to be hitting right in between Francisco Lindor and Pete Alonso. That means you could easily be looking at 110 runs, 110 RBIs. He's going to have an amazing season. I would be like a teeny tiny bit worried about Soto though, joining the new team, signing the biggest contract in the history of American sports. There probably will be a tiny cold streak somewhere in there. We saw what happened to Francisco Lindor his first season with the Mets. I know Soto just played in New York and he was amazing the whole time, but there has to be some psychology around signing a deal like that. I'm not really scared about him specifically because it seems like he can handle literally anything on earth, but that's the one teeny tiny itty bitty teeny tiny little concern for him, especially when you're going to be taking him at the top of your draft. Moving on to tier 2, we have Kyle Tucker, Mookie Betts, Yordan Alvarez, and Fernando Tatis Jr. This is your tier of very solid first round outfielders, guys you don't really have to think that much about, and players you're pretty certain will wind up being really, really good by year's end. First up is Kyle Tucker. He had that weird injury thing last year with his shin, but I don't know if people realize or understand how dominant he was before he went down. For his entire season, which was only 78 games, just a hair shy of a half a year, he had 23 homers, 11 stolen bases, and a nearly 1,000 OPS. So more or less, he was on pace for about 50 homers, 25 steals. That would be one of the best players in baseball easily. The only thing though, one small cause for concern is that Wrigley Field, because Kyle Tucker was traded this offseason from the Astros to the Cubs, is not very kind to left-handed power hitters. Based on StatCast park factors, it's the 8th most difficult park for a lefty to homer out of, while Minute Maid was the 9th easiest. So that's a big downgrade. Not a huge concern, but something to keep in mind. Then we have Mookie Betts, solid as heck. I talked about him on the shortstop preview, which also, that video is in the description here. It's really good for his fantasy value that he is getting multiple position eligibility, but probably is a little bit more concerning for his health, but probably will be playing more games because Dodgers literally need him defensively at shortstop. It's really just nitpicking. He's an incredible baseball player. No concern with Mookie Betts. Next, we have Yordan Alvarez, who probably just as a pure hitter belongs to be in that tier with Judge and Soto and Shohei Ohtani as the best hitters in baseball. And last year, he got over 600 plate appearances for the first time in his career, which really helped his volume, your counting stats, your rotisserie league, your weekly set lineups. He also played 53 games in the outfield, which is the second most he ever had in his career. But manager Joe Espada has said this year he wants Yordan to play in the field less. I guess to give his knees a little break. He also gets a huge benefit in points leagues, so he's going to have a high batting average. He very rarely strikes out, and he still has that gargantuan power that you expect from the biggest power hitters in the league. Yordan's a smash and a really, really good sneaky pick in the middle or back end first round of your points leagues. Lastly, we have Fernando Tatis Jr., who I simply will not quit. I believe in my heart, in my head, that there is still true superstar upside inside of Tatis. There's definitely some concern that he has not been the super elite megastar since before the horrible wrist injury he got from a motorcycle accident and then the ensuing PED suspension that happened later that season in 2022. And he also dislocated his shoulder, I think a time or 2 in 2021, but I do not care. I saw with my eyes in 2019 and 2021 everything this guy could be, and it was glorious. He's still very young. He's still basically a lock to be a 30-30 guy with a decent batting average. And he's also become one of the best defensive corner outfielders in the league over the last few seasons. Fernando Tatis still has that juice in him, and that's why I'm still ranking him in this tier with a lot of guys who are probably much more certain, but truthfully at the end of the day, maybe besides Kyle Tucker, Tatis' stealing still goes above them. And I'm comfortable spending a first round pick on him in most points leagues, or any league really. All right, now we got the next tier. Very small tier, 2 guys who have done it and also have not done it, but have the potential to do a lot of it, and that's Corbin Carroll and Julio Rodriguez. This could be a really special season for Corbin Carroll, but it is capped a little bit in points leagues because specifically stolen bases are his thing. If you guys are playing in a categories rotisserie-based league that values stolen bases as its own category, Carroll jumps up to the next tier because he's likely to steal about 50 of those. There's not that many guys in the league who are going to be able to steal 50 bases and hit the way that Carroll's going to hit. There is some concern with Carroll coming off a bad season last year where he still had 20 homers, 30 stolen bases, and scored 120 runs. But the shape of his season matters a lot in context to what we expect Carroll to do this year. On July 6th of last year, he only had 2 home runs and a .210 batting average. That, interestingly, was about one exact year after he had a really scary shoulder injury when he dislocated his shoulder on a swing the previous season in a game against the Mets. Then in 71 games to close the season, Carroll hit 20 homers, had 20 stolen bases, and had a .930 OPS. That's a guy who looks like he could probably be a 30, 35 homer guy easily over a full season and still steal something like 35 to 40 bases. He feels like he could very easily join the tier above as long as that shoulder's healthy and it's just all systems go, just as it was in the second half of last year. Then we have Julio Rodriguez, who also did not have a very good 2024 after a 2023 where he lit the world on fire. Julio's a very streaky player, and last year he started the season very cold. Then he started to get hot towards the end. He had an injury that knocked out a couple weeks of his season while he was in that hot streak, so wasn't able to kind of pull himself all the way back to the stats that we expect. Again, that comes from a player like Julio, who's a bit more of a free swinger and who kind of just loves to take his hacks. Really, to me, at the end of the day, this kind of just feels like the ebb and flow of a young superstar who's trying to find his footing in the league and establish himself. But I still really like him in this tier. All right, next up. Now, this tier starts to get very fun. We have Jackson Merrill, Jarren Duran, Ronald Acuna Jr., and Jackson Chourio. First up is Jackson Merrill, who was honestly a little bit overwhelmingly good as a rookie last year, while he was even trying to learn center field on the fly, which he was elite at as well. He had power, he had speed, he had contact ability, he was super clutch with all of his walk-off home runs. He was everything and seemingly galvanized this Padres team as they kind of ran through the regular season last year. But just to nitpick a few things, but you kind of have to do that with a young player who's being drafted in the second or third rounds in most leagues. He is a very aggressive hitter, which worked really well last year because he has such incredible back control and hit tool. That allowed him to kind of just take his swings, spray the ball everywhere, and get to his power because he is so strong and is so good at getting that barrel on the baseball. But I feel like there kind of has to be an adjustment from opposing pitchers to force him to wait for his pitch. His profile to me reminds me actually a lot of Julio Rodriguez from 2023. And we saw in 2024 that pitchers were much more careful with Julio. We're throwing him fewer pitches in the strike zone, more pitches dotted low and away, a lot of sliders that darted away from him. I really like Merrill's skill set and everything that's underlying, but I do think there's going to have to be an adjustment from him to seek his pitch. I think from this tier, he might be, this might be a little crazy to say, he might be the riskiest guy, but he might also have the highest upside, especially in a points league, because he makes so much contact and likely will have a pretty high batting average. Moving on is Jarren Duran. His breakout is very real. It happened a little bit later, but hey, happened all the same. He got his first full-time job with the Red Sox in the middle of 2023, so we're 1,100 plate appearances into the Jarren Duran experience. And he has an .832 OPS with tons of home runs and even more stolen bases. That's an amazing player in fantasy baseball, and it also helps a lot that he's hitting leadoff in a really talented Red Sox lineup in a place like Fenway Park. That's an amazing park to hit in. One little caveat with Duran though, because again, you have to nitpick when guys are being drafted so highly without the track record of these long-term superstars. He had 735 plate appearances last year, which is a really good thing. He basically played the whole season. There were no injuries, no setbacks. The only thing that happened that took him out of a few games was a comment that he made that you guys may remember. Nevertheless, it seems like it's his intention to play the whole 162 games. He's so valuable to this team. I'm sure the Red Sox want him to play the whole 162 games. But when you compile that many counting stats and you don't have like an elite of the elite OPS, you have to look at those plate appearances and think there has to just be some regression that happens here. A quad, a hamstring, any little thing, a finger, an ankle, a wrist. Things always happen, especially players like Duran who kind of play 100 miles an hour. So if you're penciling him in for something like 680 plate appearances instead of the 730, that takes down his projection a little bit, but he's definitely still in this tier. All right, next, one of the hardest players to figure out this year in fantasy, Ronald Acuna Jr. The injuries are really starting to add up, and they're getting a little bit scary to me. He's had a handful of soft tissue things over the years, and now he's also torn each of his ACLs. When he tore the last one, 2021, the entire 2022 season seemed to be a struggle for him. He wasn't running, he couldn't get to his power. He was a big disappointment that year in fantasy. Then the next year, when he was fully healthy in 2023, he had one of the best offensive seasons we've ever seen in the league. So I'm targeting him if he drops, but if these guys in this tier are available, I'm not taking Acuna over them. I'm looking for Acuna, even though I have him ranked in this tier, because I think his potential is to be a player by the end of the year that winds up in this tier. It's a massive amount of risk, and I probably want to draft him more so in the next tier as he starts getting into those guys, because that's where I think he becomes a value rather than someone who's being taken at value, because the downside is really serious. 2 torn ACLs is crazy. All right, now lastly, here's Jackson Chourio. Based on projections, based on stats he accumulated last year, I don't really think he belongs in this tier, but just watching him, my visual eye test of Jackson Chourio, I think there's a really good chance he goes nuclear and becomes truthfully one of the best players in baseball, someone that's an easy first round pick next year. Looking at his whole season overall last year too, like he was fine. He was totally solid. Very good player. 20 homers, 20 steals, 80 runs, 80 RBIs, 275 average. That's an awesome baseball player, especially from a 20-year-old. But then you dig a little bit deeper, you kind of realize that there's a spot in the middle of the season where things seem to click for Chourio, and he turned it on. His final 81 games, so exactly what would be half of a full major league season, he had 14 homers, 14 stolen bases, 50 RBIs, 50 runs scored, 7 and a 310 batting average. That suddenly is a superstar if you do that over a whole season. That's a guy that's a future first round pick. And kind of looking under the hood for that hot half of a season, his hard hit rate went way up, his chase rate fell, his swing strike rate fell. It seemed like a lot of little adjustments that Chourio made kind of coalesced at the same time. Then there were times during that wildcard series against the Mets, he truly looked like the best player on the field. Baseball is hard, sophomore slumps are real. I've talked about some sophomore slumps, already some players on this list, but Chourio seems to have that it to him. Jackson Merrill might have that too. The two Jacksons I think are the most exciting players in this tier. Also definitely some downside that kind of blend in with the next tier, but this is a really exciting group of young outfielders. And you guys are probably sensing like, wow, we're already 12 outfielders in, all these guys are monsters. That is true, and you kind of have to play a little game with yourself in your own draft. You have to understand how many outfielders you need to take. There's some leagues you need 3 outfielders, some you need 4 outfielders, some you need 5 outfielders, 10-team leagues, 12-team leagues, 15-team leagues, 1 utility spot, 2 utility spots, 3 utility spots. You want to get a lot of these superstar outfielders because they have the potential to truly be some of the best players in baseball, some of the best players in fantasy. But you kind of have to measure it a little bit. Like if you go too outfield heavy too quickly and then leave your infield spots open, this outfield list keeps getting deeper and deeper and deeper while the infield lists dry up quickly. So definitely be able to measure your shots with your outfielders, take your spots, find the players who are dropping, find your values, and now some of these middle tiers coming up because there are so many really good outfielders, way more really good outfielders and really good infielders. All right, now moving on to the next tier. We have Wyatt Langford, O'Neal Cruz, Jazz Chisholm, Michael Harris, James Wood, and Teoscar Hernandez. A lot of exciting, flashy young players, and Teoscar Hernandez, the grandpa, but let's go. First up is Wyatt Langford. It was kind of shocking based on how his season began last year and how little fanfare he got, how good his numbers wound up by season's end. His first month as a rookie was really trying. It was impressive enough that he made the Rangers out of camp, but then over his first 31 games, he had just 1 home run, which was an inside the park homer, 1 stolen base, and a 60 WRC+. Very bad. Then he strained his hamstring and missed about 3 or 4 weeks. And when he came back in his final 100 games of the season, he had 15 homers, 18 stolen bases, and a 120 WRC+. That's the foundation of someone who could be a special hitter this year. He made great swing decisions, he pulled the ball, he hit the ball really, really hard. Like, it's all there for Wyatt Langford. It's all in front of him. And the Rangers honestly might have the best lineup in baseball. It looks like they're comfortable putting Wyatt Langford smack dab in the middle of it. There was a bit of a scary moment for him early in spring where he had an oblique strain, but he came back and he's mashing already. I genuinely want to put him in the tier above because I think the floor is kind of a 2020 player with a good batting average. I just don't know where the ceiling is, especially relative to those players above who, 1, have already done it for a full season better than Langford was last year, and 2, are either going to have a higher batting average, more homers, more stolen bases, or more of all those things. So that's why he's in this tier at the top of it. But now moving on, we got O'Neal Cruz. I talked about Cruz in my shortstop preview, but this year he is moving to the outfield full time, which could be a big development for him because he wasn't the best defensive shortstop. And truthfully, he might have the best pure power in baseball. Last season alone, he had the 4 hardest hit balls in the league, 8 of the 11 hardest hit, 15 of the 30 hardest hit, and he had 24 balls in play that were hit harder than 115 miles an hour. The next closest player had 17. And on top of that, for a player that only hit about 20 or so home runs, 4 of those home runs were hit over 450 feet. The only players with more home runs hit over 450 feet were Aaron Judge and Shohei Ohtani, who hit a lot more home runs than O'Neal Cruz did. He also sneakily last year had a 2020 season with 260 batting average. That's kind of a really good floor. If he can get to the 35 home run power, possibly 40 or 45 home run power that I think he's honestly capable of, he becomes someone that also gets near the first round discussion next year. He really does have a lead upside. He has much higher upside than a guy like Wyatt Langford, but the floor is also much lower because O'Neal Cruz could regress. There's still a lot of swing and miss in his game. He's still trying to pick his spots, when to be more aggressive, when to be more passive. There's still a lot of work to do on his approach, but again, the power is unbelievable. All right, moving on, Jazz Chisholm. This is the third video where I'm mentioning Chisholm because he's also eligible at second base and third base. I don't want to say too much about Jazz because if you are drafting him, it's likely to play one of those infield positions because like I said before, outfield is so deep where those infield positions are so shallow. But in a full season in the Yankee lineup, there's a really good chance that he has something like 30 homers and 50 steals with 100 RBIs because I think he's going to be hitting fifth. The only issue for Jazz always going to be health. Talent is not questioned. He's probably become one of the most underrated players in the league. He has crazy versatility, power, speed, aura. He's special. All right, next up we have Michael Harris. He's had a very weird career so far. If you look at the 3 complete seasons that Michael Harris has played, every single year he's gotten worse in terms of WRC+, which is kind of scary that as you keep playing baseball, you keep performing worse. And a big reason for that is that Harris has these really big hot streaks that wind up fading into cold streaks, and it goes hot, cold, hot, cold. There's no real middle ground to his game. That's because he's such a free swinger and is allergic to walks. Just last year, in the month of May, he had a 46 WRC+, which that means that he was about 50% worse than league average because 100 WRC+ means you're the average hitter in baseball. That takes into account your productivity, the ballparks you're playing in, everything. It's a really, really good measure for what a hitter's doing relative to the rest of the league. So again, Harris had a 46 WRC+ in May, and then in September, he had a 150 WRC+. That right there, those 2 months, that's the difference between like an emergency third defensive-only catcher and Bryce Harper. That's how big of a difference. That's how much of a cavern Michael Harris has in between his seasons with his hot and cold streaks. He's still a 2020 guy who's going to have a high batting average, but again, you have to be able to measure those hot and cold streaks. You can't get too jumpy with Michael Harris. And the hit tool and speed combo kind of makes him a great value in all points and rotisserie leagues. Again, just be ready for those cold streaks, weather the storm, and get ready for the supernova streaks that come after them. Next up, we got James Wood, who truthfully I think might be a living, breathing alien. He's a 6'7" behemoth with plus power, some of the best power in the league. plus speed, and never chases pitches out of the strike zone. That's a ridiculous package to be starting out with as a ball player. He came up last season at 21 and looked shockingly comfortable out of the gate, with 9 homers, 14 stolen bases, and 800 OPS in nearly half a season. But the crazy thing about his rookie year is how much power he got to without really ever pulling the baseball. His first pulled fly ball came in the 42nd game of his career. He had 177 plate appearances and saw 700 pitches at the major league level before he pulled a fly ball. And that first pulled fly ball was a 420-foot home run at Citizens Bank Park, a moonshot. His pull rate jumped to about league average from that point on in the season, but most of those pulled balls were on the ground, not in the air, where he could access that amazing power that he has. There's so much potential here. I know we're only scratching the surface. The big breakout might not come this year. I might be overranking Wood a little bit this year on the potential, but if it does click, it could click in a magnificent way. Also, those steals really help to anchor his value in rotisserie league, so that's another reason why he's in this tier. Also, those stolen bases really anchor his value in rotisserie league, so he's still going to be a highly productive player for you, but maybe we're a year away from the true superstar breakout, or it happens this year and you get someone who's a bona fide superstar. All right, last up in this tier is Teoscar Hernandez. When I put Teoscar in this tier, I kind of just thought about that Steve Buscemi meme, how do you do, fellow kids? Because that's what it feels like with the old man and all the young breakouts. But Teoscar straight up mashed last year with the Dodgers. He's going to be hitting in the middle of that lineup. He's basically a lock for 30 homers, tons of runs, tons of RBIs. He's very reliable, and he's probably very undervalued right now in drafts because, again, and me especially, I'm guilty of this as well. We get excited about these breakouts. We get excited about players rather than statistics. Like these guys, you could tell yourself the narratives about James Wood, Jazz Chisholm, Michael Harris, Wyatt Langford, O'Neal Cruz. That makes you really want to draft them over a bunch of steady veterans. Teoscar is one of those veterans. There's a lot more of those reliable guys in the next tier who probably are becoming some of the best values in drafts this season. And that next tier is Lawrence Butler, Anthony Santander, Brian Reynolds, Ian Happ, Stephen Kwan, and Riley Green. So I told you I was talking about boring veterans, but I gotta get one more breakout in there. It's my guy Lawrence Butler. Every single day, I kind of wound up liking him more and more. He was demoted last May, and from when he got called back up after that demotion, he had a 290 average, 330 on base percentage, 565 slugging, with 20 home runs and 15 stolen bases in 84 games. That's basically a 40 homer, 30 steal pace over a full season. Kind of ridiculous. And all of that came with solid underlying swing decision metrics and really good underlying power metrics. So it's pretty real. He isn't a high on base guy though, generally, so I am a little bit worried about his floor, but playing time shouldn't be an issue on the Athletics. And I think the ballpark they're moving to in Sacramento could wind up being a launching pad and really, really friendly to hitters. I really wanted to put him in the tier above, but I knew I just couldn't do that with some of the more reliable guys up there with much better pedigree and who had, again, slightly better underlying stuff or had already done it for a full season at this level. But moving on, another really stable veteran, Anthony Santander. In the future, I'm a little worried about Santander. The plate approach is a concern, the on-base ability is a concern, but this year, his first year in Toronto, I expect him to mash. It's also so cool that he's a switch-hitting power hitter and he's able to pull all of his fly balls. Love that. And truthfully, I think his draft cost does bake in a little bit of risk that his plate approach gives him. And the fact he's moving from the Orioles to the Blue Jays, so it is a bit of a lineup downgrade. But this is a really good player. Love Santander this year. Also love the next guy, one of the steadiest players in baseball, Brian Reynolds. He does not get the respect he deserves. He's basically a lock for 25 homers, 80 runs scored, 80 RBIs, a good batting average, and a handful of steals, always at the top of that Pirates lineup. Another switch hitter, he is like clockwork. It was also crazy to me that he has an 822 career OPS. Solid, underrated, amazing value. Same with the next guy, Ian Happ. You guys see how much I like this tier. Perpetually underrated Ian Happ. Over the last 3 seasons, combined and then averaged out, he's got 21 homers, 82 runs scored, 12 stolen bases, and a 254, 348, 437 slash line. And an average 153 games per year, and his WRC plus has not dipped below 120. That is such a solid player. And he should get a boost this year, hitting leadoff in that Cubs order with Kyle Tucker now moving into the 2 spot behind him. He's a metronome, one of my favorite targets this season. Next we have Stephen Kwan, who's in this tier because he's an ESPN, specifically points league king. Similar to Luis Arias and all the infield shows I did. It's just contact, 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 contact. All other formats, you probably do have to drop him down a full tier, but if you play in an ESPN points league, all the contact he makes, how high his batting average is, that is incredible for his value. Also last year, he kind of had a little bit of power. 14 home runs in 120 games is not a joke. I think a big part of that was some renovations they made to Progressive Field in Cleveland, and they apparently opened up a wind tunnel in right field that allowed left-handed hitters to get a lot more power and kind of shoot the ball out there. But nevertheless, if he can have a 300 batting average and hit 15 homers over a full season, he's a massive bargain. Again, someone to target in your ESPN points leagues. He's a freak there. And also, I really just love him as a player. He's super intense. He's really good defensively. He does a lot of things well. Like, he's a winning ball player, and I love to see that. All right, now, lastly in this tier is Riley Green. I think Riley Green would be someone who's probably in the tier above this if his home park was in Detroit, because that's a really tough place to hit with a bad supporting cast around him. But all his underlying stuff is so good. He makes great swing decisions. He never chases. He hits the ball really, really hard consistently. The last keys for him for taking this really big jump up would either be to strike out less or pull the ball. Truthfully, if he does both of them, he's an animal. If he does one of those things, he jumps up a tier. And I think he kind of might just be hiding in plain sight as a mega prospect who is a high draft pick, who has really good underlying stuff, who isn't really being viewed in the same way as the guys in the tier above, the more like flashier breakout picks. But I like Riley Green a lot. Now that was exactly 24 outfielders. So if you guys play in a 12-team league, those are your outfielder 1, outfielder 2s. Now we're going into guys who could be outfielder 3s, fringy outfielder 2s. We're going to start buzzing through these guys because we have a lot more to get through. But these are still a lot of really, really interesting players and why it might make sense in your drafts to wait back a little bit in that first tier of outfielders. You want probably one of those guys in the top 10 because, again, they could be some of the best players in baseball. When I start telling you these names, 25 to 40, you're going to be like, wow, there are a lot of really good outfielders out there. A lot of guys who could be really valuable to your fantasy teams and allow you to grab infielders who might be worse players, but help you organize a better roster. All right, now this tier is Mike Trout, Seiya Suzuki, Cody Bellinger, Christian Yelich, Luis Robert, and Randy Arozarena. The veteran tier, baby. First up is Trout. Just please stay healthy one time. At this spot in your draft, there really isn't anybody else with true 40 home run upside, which Trout does have. But just like, if he could get like 400 plate appearances, he's being drafted right now outside the top 100 in most drafts, he will be a smash. This is the first time in years I've actually been drafting Trout in a lot of my teams, because since that draft price has now gone down, I feel like there's a way for him to actually return positive value on it. Just Mike Trout, give us one more real season. Give us one more classic Mike Trout season. Please. We all want to see it, man. Next is Seiya Suzuki, who's sneaky, like so good. Such a good hitter. One of the best profiles in the league, honestly. Last season, he was a top 24 outfielder in ESPN standard leagues and a top 40 player overall in 5x5 rotisserie leagues. And that came after he missed a whole month with an oblique strain and still struggled for like 3 or 4 weeks upon returning with that oblique strain. He's got a plus approach, he's got plus power, he's got plus speed. And I think there is still some legitimate home run upside in Seiya Suzuki to get to 35, 37 bombs, because he does hit the ball so hard. Like his barrel rate, his pulled fly ball rate, his average exit velocity, his hard hit rate. It's up there with some of the most powerful hitters in the league. And him hitting directly behind Ian Happ and Kyle Tucker will be amazing. There will be a lot of ducks on the pond for Seiya Suzuki this year. The only thing with him is always health, but if he can just figure out a way to stay healthy, and he's DHing full time this year, so maybe that'll help him, he could really, really bring back positive value in this draft cost. Next, we have Cody Bellinger, tailor-made for Yankee Stadium. In the last couple of years, he sacrificed a lot of his power for contact, but the one thing he still can do with power is pull fly balls. Yankee Stadium with the short right field porch is an amazing place for a left-handed hitter to pull fly balls. I like him a lot this year, but probably not as much as the field, because again, the soft skills aren't that great. The power numbers really aren't that good. It's mostly about him just like scooping that ball and getting out over the right field fence. I also like him more as a first base eligible player because he will steal some bases. Not many other first basemen will steal bases. So if you're playing in a category rotisserie based league, he's kind of a unicorn there and will kind of elevate your whole roster. Next up is Christian Yelich, who was truthfully amazing last year before his back gave out. Like so good. He was like kind of like first round pick value good. When he went down, he had the 3rd highest batting average in the league, one of the top on base percentages in the league. And he was on base for 25 homers, 40 stolen bases, 100 runs scored, and 100 RBIs. And that came with all his underlying stats, his power stats, his plate discipline, his swing decisions, looking like they were all in line with what he was doing when he was competing and winning MVP awards a few years ago. And then he got the back surgery, and it was really, really, really scary. Because the surgery was described as removing a damaged part of a disc from his spine, and he said afterward it was something that needed to happen. I don't want to hear that a 33-year-old needs to remove the damaged part of a disc from their spine. That's horrifying. But he is back in the spring, he is mashing, and truthfully, he'd be at least 1 tier, if not 2 tiers above this, if I was truly 100% confident in his health moving forward. But he has to get that ding because he just simply has been injury prone. Next up is Luis Robert, another guy who's been injury prone, another guy who really was not very good last year, but he's still in this year in the potential alone. He to me feels like he could be this year's Jazz Chisholm, where he meanders through the first half of the season, gets traded to a contender, and then becomes a star again. I just really can't trust him in the middle of that White Sox order. The plate discipline's bad enough, the injury risk is bad enough, the supporting cast is bad enough, but he is someone to dream on. Lastly is Randy Arozarena. He gets a bump in your rotisserie leagues, he's going to steal a bunch of bases still, and I'm just really ready to trust him again, give him the benefit of the doubt after his first ever bad season last year. He still won 2020 and again a bad season, but it didn't look that good. The batting average was really low, the on-base percentage was really low. It was a bad season. Seattle also just really stinks to hit in, but he's been too consistent for too long to quit on now. All right, moving on to the next tier. This is a very boring tier, but a lot of good players still. We have Taylor Ward, Brandon Nimmo, Jurickson Profar, Ilya Ramos, Nick Castellanos, Brenton Doyle, Spencer Steer, and Tyler O'Neill. First up is Taylor Ward, who's just a really productive player, flies under the radar because he's trapped in Anaheim. Never chases, hits the ball hard, plays good defense. He's good for 25 homers, 80 runs scored, 80 RBIs, easy peasy. Next is Brandon Nimmo, who's an interesting player to go about right now because last season he was crushing the ball in the first half. It was some of the best baseball he's ever played in his career. And you guys see that Mets poster behind me. I've seen all the baseball Brandon Nimmo's played in his entire career. At the All-Star break, he had 16 home runs and 815 OPS. He was truly snubbed from that game. But then in the second half, he had some plantar fasciitis that cropped up in his foot, and he only hit 190 with no power whatsoever. It was the first time in 4 years his full season OPS dropped below 800, and we have a reason for that because we saw the plantar fasciitis. He was literally limping around the outfield for the Mets in the postseason. He's also nicked up in the spring. There's some reports he might have to DH early in the year, but I think his bat will be in the lineup no matter what. And reportedly, he's going to be hitting 4th behind Francisco Lindor, Juan Soto, and Pete Alonso. I still like him there as a run producer. I can't find myself quitting on Brandon Nimmo in fantasy. I can't. Next up is Jurickson Profar, which, like, guys, where did that breakout come from? He had 20 home runs for the first time since 2019, which really doesn't count because 2019 was a ridiculous season. He set career best with a 280 batting average, 380 on base percentage, and 459 slugging percentage. It's incredible triple slash. And he was a contact machine who really commanded the strike zone. I was truthfully planning not to be super in on Profar this year, but then he was signed by the Braves. He gets to hit leadoff until Ronald Acuna Jr. comes back. He can wind up being a cog in the middle bottom of that order, producing a ton of runs after Acuna's back. Or if Acuna struggles, Michael Harris struggles, he can wind up floating his way back to the top again because we know how much he gets on base. I weirdly like Profar mostly because of that landing spot. I can't get away. Next up is Ilya Ramos, who burst on the scene last year as kind of a post-hype prospect with the Giants. He's aggressive in the right spots. He has tons of power. The only problem is he doesn't really pull the ball enough, and San Francisco is really tough place for right-handed hitter to homer, especially if they're not pulling the ball. But amazingly, he was the first right-handed batter ever to hit a home run into the McCovey Cove, the first right-handed splash in the history of that ballpark, which is crazy. That shows how freaky his power actually is. I think he's being slept on a smidge right now. Next up up is Nick Castellanos, who in real life isn't very good anymore. He doesn't really play very good defense. He doesn't really have the best plate approach. He's kind of coming on the end of that contract. I'm sure the Phillies are very excited for him to get out of there. But in fantasy, he's still going to be in the middle of a highly productive lineup. He's not getting oohs and ahs in your draft room, but he's going to be a very productive player, no doubt about it. Then we have Brenton Doyle, who if you guys are playing in rotisserie categories league, I've said this a few times, Doyle belongs way higher because he's going to steal a ton of bases, 30, 40 stolen bases. But it's just very hard for me to be in on a 26-year-old breakout in Coors Field with a 289 career on base percentage. I just can't do it. That's never a profile I'm going to go after. The defense is so good though for him. He's basically a platinum glove winner in center field that he will never leave the lineup. So even if last year's games with the bat don't hold, he's playing every day, he's stealing bases, and he is swinging a lot, and half his games will be in Coors Field. So there's definitely a way to manage and maneuver Brenton Doyle, especially in daily leagues, especially in rotisserie leagues, for him to be a very valuable player. Then we have Spencer Steer, who right now is dealing with a bit of a shoulder thing in the spring, and he probably would be a tier above if he was healthy. Super sneaky 20 homers and 25 stolen bases last year, just with an average that dropped a lot, especially compared to 2023 when the average was very good. I think he got a little bit unlucky last year. In 2023, he got a little bit lucky, so I think his true talent kind of falls in between what happened those 2 years, but still a really solid bat that plays in Great American Ballpark, which is a great place to hit. Lastly, in this year, we have Tyler O'Neill, who had such a sneaky 31 homers in 113 games last year. That was basically a 40 homer pace if he could have stayed healthy. But that's always been the thing with Tyler O'Neill. He always finds a way to get hurt. The biceps are a little too jacked, body's a little too tight. He always finds a way to pull a muscle every single year with Tyler O'Neill. But the Orioles have a great lineup. He's basically coming in as the Anthony Santander replacement. The strikeout rate is a little high, and there is always the downside for durability, but there is a world if you squint where Tyler O'Neill gets to 140 games played and hits something like 40 homers, especially with the left field fence moving in Camden Yards. Before we do get to that last tier, I want to mention some guys who are not going to be very valuable in ESPN points league, so I didn't want to give them a whole tier themselves. These are guys that we call bunnies. Guys are going to be stealing a lot of bases, guys you want to be drafting in your rotisserie leagues, and guys I just wanted to mention in this preview in general, because again, there are so many interesting outfielders. First is Pete Crow Armstrong, who in real life is a super legit player, amazing defensive player. He's finding his hit tool, but still not quite there yet. Same with the power. So I wouldn't be super going after him points leagues. He could be the last pick on your bench, but he's going to steal a lot of bags. Rotisserie league, can't forget about him. Should be multiple tiers ahead in rotisserie leagues. Then Victor Robles, who doesn't have a very good offensive profile, but is going to be playing every day in Seattle, playing good defense, stealing tons of bases. Also Ceddanne Rafaela, who I don't really like his profile. I don't really see it with him, but he does kind of have this vibe when he plays. He kind of has this aura, kind of has this swag that makes me think he is going to make it, and he's eligible a few different positions, so he does have some value. Then Cedric Mullins, nice bounce back, going to steal some bags. Tommy Edman, he has a totally fine profile. Again, will swipe some bags, be in the middle of that Dodgers lineup. And Brandon Marsh, who's one of the cheapest 2020 guys you're ever going to find in drafts, but his upside is severely capped by his very, very high strikeout rate that he's never been able to take down. All right, now let's run through the last tier really quickly. It's Colton Cowser, Adolis Garcia, Dylan Cruz, Jason Dominguez, Kerry Carpenter, JJ Bleday, Jung-Hoo Lee, Alec Burleson, Jorge Soler. First is Cowser, who I really like, but there's ample risk. Hasn't really found the right plate discipline yet. He doesn't really know the spots to be aggressive and when to be passive, but when he does hit the ball, he hits it really hard. That also comes with a lot of swing and miss. Again, Camden Yards left field is moving in, so that power could play up. He's a good athlete. He's going to be on the field every single day. He's just someone I'm willing to bet on as a 24-year-old high draft pick in an organization that's been developing a lot of hitters. Like, I could definitely see it not really coming this year, especially with that high strikeout rate. Then Adolis Garcia, who you just kind of have to hope last year wasn't as bad. We're only 1 year removed from a 39 homer campaign. He still hit the ball really hard, but his contact rate fell pretty sharply as he was swinging and missing more. That made how much chasing he does out of the strike zone but much more pronounced, and that's why it looked like he fell off a cliff. Worth a shot though as a bounce back flyer late in your drafts. Then two guys here who I really want to dream on, but we might be 1 year away from the true breakouts. That's Dylan Cruz and Jason Dominguez. Cruz last year, the surface numbers were very bad, but all the underlying stuff was really good. Good swing decisions, hit the ball hard, big speed, played really good defense. Looks like he has an easy job in Washington this season. This might be the year it comes together. I am a believer, but I understand if it's not. But also, again, he's going to steal a ton of bags. Rotisserie leagues, up. Categories leagues, up. At least 2 tiers. The same goes for Jason Dominguez, who again, I'm very confident in his future, but this might not be the year. Because there's still a lot of pushing and pulling Dominguez has to do with his walk rate, strikeout rate, plate discipline before it all seems to really coalesce. Because he has really good power, but he's got to focus on lifting it, he's got to focus on pulling it. There's just a lot of tiny little tweaks Dominguez has to make before he can become the player we've expected him to be. But he has this swag about him where he might just be able to walk in and be a superstar. His 2 cups of coffee with the Yankees, he's had big moments already. I just don't know how sustainable all this will be. He only has 100 major league plate appearances. That's why he's still a very young player. He's still considered the rookie. People make fun of him on Twitter. Not cool. Don't make fun of Jason Dominguez. Still big potential. He's still very young. There's a lot of upside in Jason Dominguez. I just think this might be the year before the year for him and maybe Cruz. All right, now last few guys here, Kerry Carpenter. Kerry Carpenter gets a big gold star, guys. Big gold star if you play in daily leagues. Because Kerry Carpenter is a left-handed masher who crushes the ball, who's going to hit for a lot of power, who's going to hit the ball really hard consistently, who the Tigers will always play against right-handed pitchers, but he will never play against left-handed pitchers. So that will ding him in weekly leagues. Because you have to set your lineup on Sunday night or Monday morning, and you know the Tigers are playing against 2 lefties that week, which will happen most weeks. Do you want to play Kerry Carpenter for 3 or 4 games, or do you want to take him out, put someone who's going to play 6 games? Those are really annoying decisions, and that really eats away his value in a weekly league. But again, big gold star in daily leagues. Because fantasy baseball is a volume game at the end of the day. You want as many plate appearances, at-bats, innings as possible. That's the key to winning these leagues. Kerry Carpenter, sadly, while he gives you a lot of top-end talent, will not give you that in a weekly league. So that's why I have him ranked this low. Next is JJ Bleday. Like I said with Lawrence Butler, Sacramento might be a launching pad, so I want parts of this Athletics offense if I can get them. And I think Blade is a really good cheap option who sneakily had a really good season last year, hits the ball hard, makes good swing decisions, pulls his fly balls often, solid floor with legitimate upside. Next, Jung-Hoo Lee. He's someone I'm really a fan of. His bat speed is much better than his power numbers would indicate, and I think that could really help him be an extra base hit machine in San Francisco. I don't know if there'll be home runs, but I can see Jung-Hoo Lee being someone that hits lots of doubles and triples out there in Oracle Park. He's also a contact king, which is again very good for ESPN standard points leagues. We just literally haven't been able to see him do it over a long stretch of time because he got injured very early last year in his first season in the States. But I could super easily see something like a 300 batting average, a 350 on base percentage, 7 to 10 homers, 15 to 20 steals, but then maybe 40-ish doubles and triples combined. Then two guys quickly, Alec Burleson. Boring compiler, was much more aggressive last year on pitches in the strike zone. That helped him get to 20 home runs. He looks like he'll be an everyday player in the Cardinals. You're going to be staring at Alec Burleson on your waiver wire the first time you have a guy that gets injured, and he's a really good guy to pick up. Just plug in the lineup and not think about it for a couple weeks. He won't be spectacular, but he'll get the job done. Then Jorge Soler has always been a favorite of mine. I just can't quit him. Still hits the ball really hard. Still makes pretty good swing decisions. We'll be playing every day in a pretty bad Angels lineup. Don't think too hard. Jorge Soler, when he's on your waiver wire and you need injury replacement, just throw him in there for a few weeks. Hope you get the hot stretch. But all right, guys, wow. 47 outfielders ranked. Probably talked about over 50 of them. Again, thank you guys so much. It's been really fun to do this channel. Really fun to be hanging out with you guys. So grateful for all the support, and I'll see you guys next time. Thank you.